3 days after giving birth to my twins, I was still in the hospital when my mother-in-law walked into my room carrying a leather briefcase. I thought she had come to meet her grandchildren. Instead, she placed a contract on my bed. Then she slid a check toward me. $22 million. My heart stopped when I heard her next words. "I don't want you," she said coldly. "I only want the babies." For a moment, I thought she was joking. She wasn't. What happened over the next 6 months destroyed her family, her empire, and nearly her fortune. And she never saw it coming. My name is Emma Parker, and I was 30 years old when my life changed forever. 3 days earlier, I had given birth to beautiful twin boys. After years of trying, countless doctor's appointments, and more sleepless nights than I could remember, my husband Ethan and I finally had the family we had always dreamed about. At least, that's what I thought. As I sat in my hospital room holding my sons, I felt happier than I ever had before. The boys were sleeping peacefully against my chest when the door suddenly opened. I expected to see a nurse. Instead, my mother-in-law, Victoria Harrington, walked inside. Victoria wasn't the kind of woman people forgot. She owned one of the largest investment companies in the state and carried herself like she owned every room she entered. For years, she had made it clear that she didn't think I was good enough for her son. I came from a middle-class family. She came from old money. In her eyes, that difference mattered. Behind Victoria walked a man in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. My smile disappeared. "What is this?" I asked. Victoria ignored the question. She looked at the twins and smiled. Not the warm smile of a grandmother. Something colder. Something calculating. "They're perfect," she said quietly. Then she nodded at the man. He placed the briefcase on a nearby table and opened it. Inside were several documents.
And a check.
I stared at the number written across the front. $22 million. For a moment, I thought I was reading it wrong. Then Victoria sat beside my bed. "Emma," she said calmly, "I'm going to make you an offer that will solve all your problems." My stomach tightened. "What kind of offer?" She folded her hands. "I want full custody of the twins." The room went silent. I actually laughed because the idea sounded insane. Then I realized nobody else was laughing. Not Victoria. Not the lawyer. Not even Ethan. I slowly turned toward my husband. He was standing near the window, looking at the floor, avoiding my eyes. The realization hit me like a truck. He knew. He had known before she walked into this room. "You planned this," I whispered. Ethan still couldn't look at me. Victoria slid the documents closer. "Take the $22 million, she said. "Sign the papers, and the boys will have a life beyond anything you could ever provide." I pushed the documents away immediately.
"No."
Victoria didn't seem surprised. Instead, a small smile appeared on her face. Then she tapped another document hidden beneath the contract. "That's unfortunate," she said, "because you haven't read the second document yet." The moment Victoria left the hospital room, I finally picked up the second document. My hands were shaking. I expected another custody agreement. What I found was much worse. The document contained financial records connected to Ethan. Pages and pages of signatures. Loan guarantees. Business obligations. Personal liabilities. By the time I reached the last page, I felt sick. Ethan had secretly guaranteed several risky investments for Victoria's company. If those investments failed, the debt would fall on him. And because we were married, our family could be dragged into the financial disaster. I looked at Ethan in disbelief. "You signed all of this without telling me?" He rubbed his face. "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice." His silence told me everything. Victoria had never intended to negotiate. The $22 million wasn't an offer. It was leverage, a way to pressure me into surrendering my children. The next morning, I hired an attorney named Rebecca Lawson. After reviewing the documents, she frowned. "This isn't normal," she said. "What do you mean?" "Your mother-in-law controls almost every part of Ethan's financial life. That's unusual, even for wealthy families." Over the following weeks, Rebecca and I started digging deeper. The more we discovered, the stranger things became. Victoria's empire looked powerful from the outside, But beneath the surface, it was built on complicated trusts, private agreements, and decades-old arrangements that very few people understood. One afternoon, Rebecca called me into her office. When I arrived, several folders were spread across her desk. "I think we've found something," she said. She pointed to a trust agreement created by Victoria's late husband. Buried within hundreds of pages was a clause nobody seemed to have noticed for years. The clause required company leaders to follow strict fiduciary responsibilities. If intentional manipulation of family beneficiaries could be proven, control of several major assets could be challenged. I stared at her. "You're saying Victoria could lose part of her empire?" Rebecca nodded carefully. "If we can prove what she's been doing." For the first time in months, I felt hope. Meanwhile, Victoria acted like the battle was already over. She continued pressuring Ethan. She sent legal notices, threatened custody proceedings, and constantly reminded everyone that money solved everything. Then Ethan made his final decision. He filed for divorce. The papers arrived 2 days later. Friends expected me to break down. Instead, I signed the receipt and quietly continued preparing. Because while Victoria thought she was buying my children, I was beginning to understand the weakness hidden inside her empire. And a week later, Rebecca uncovered evidence that changed everything. 6 months later, the custody hearing finally arrived. Victoria entered the courthouse looking as confident as ever. She wore an expensive designer suit and walked through the hallway surrounded by attorneys. To her, this was just another business deal. Another victory she expected to buy. Ethan followed behind her. He looked exhausted. Older, like the past few months had finally caught up with him. When the hearing began, Victoria's legal team presented their case first. They talked about wealth, private schools, luxury homes, trust funds. They argued that the twins would have every opportunity imaginable under Victoria's influence. Then it was our turn. Rebecca stood and calmly began presenting evidence. At first, Victoria looked bored. Then Rebecca displayed the financial records. The room became very quiet. One by one, she revealed documents showing how Victoria had used financial pressure to manipulate family members, influence personal decisions, and attempt to gain control over assets that weren't legally hers. The judge's expression changed. So did Victoria's. For the first time, she looked nervous. Then Rebecca introduced the trust documents. The same documents Victoria believed nobody would ever examine closely. The clause was clear. If a family beneficiary was intentionally manipulated for personal gain, certain trust protections could be revoked. The evidence spoke for itself. Within days, the consequences spread through Victoria's empire. Several board members demanded emergency meetings. Major investors began asking questions. Business partners distanced themselves. The woman who had spent decades controlling everyone around her suddenly found herself losing control. By the end of the month, she was removed from leadership of several key companies. Millions in assets were frozen pending review. Her influence vanished almost overnight. Then came the final ruling. The judge denied Victoria's custody claims completely. The twins would remain with me. No further challenges would be considered. As the hearing ended, I looked across the courtroom. Victoria sat silently in her chair. For the first time since I had met her, she had nothing to say. No threats. No offers. No power. Ethan approached me outside the courthouse. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. I believed he meant it. But some mistakes arrive too late. I wished him well and walked away. As I carried my sons toward the parking lot, I thought back to that hospital room. Victoria had offered $22 million for my children. She believed everything had a price. In the end, she lost the one thing money couldn't protect. Her family. The twins kept their mother. I kept my future. And Victoria finally learned that some things can never be purchased.